The legend of Dry Creek had been passed down through generations. Tucked away deep in the mountains, the town was once a bustling mining community, but a series of mysterious disappearances turned it into a ghost town, literally. They said no one who entered Dry Creek ever returned. The townspeople had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only empty buildings and an eerie silence. Of course, stories like that are meant to keep people away, but for some, they're an invitation. For me, it was a challenge. I was a photographer and urban explorer by trade, drawn to the abandoned, the forgotten, and the eerie. Dry Creek was exactly the kind of place that excited me. The idea of photographing a town frozen in time, untouched by modern life, was too tempting to resist. So, despite the warnings from the locals, I packed my camera gear and set off into the mountains. The drive was long and winding, the roads narrowing as I ascended higher into the hills. The trees grew denser, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, and the sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy. As I got closer, a dense fog began to roll in, shrouding everything in a thick, white blanket. It was as if the town didn't want to be found. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it, the outline of buildings emerging from the mist. Dry Creek. It was exactly as I had imagined it, yet somehow more unsettling. The streets were deserted, the windows of the old wooden houses staring out like hollow eyes. A shiver ran down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was what I had come for. I parked my car at the edge of town and stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the oppressive silence. The air was thick and still, the fog clinging to the buildings like a shroud. I grabbed my camera and started walking, eager to capture the haunting beauty of the abandoned town. The first few photos were everything I had hoped for, eerie shots of decaying buildings, rusted signs, and overgrown pathways. But as I moved deeper into the town, that uneasy feeling returned, stronger this time. It was as if the air itself was watching me, waiting for something. I reached the center of town, where the old saloon still stood, its doors creaking in the faint breeze. I stepped inside, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the light from my flashlight. The bar was still intact, bottles of long-forgotten whiskey lining the shelves, their contents turned to murky sludge. As I snapped a few photos, I heard it, a faint sound, like the distant echo of footsteps. I froze, listening intently. The sound came again, this time closer. My heart began to race. It was probably just the old building settling, I told myself. Or maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I moved back toward the door, suddenly eager to be outside. But as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the force of it rattling the windows. I jumped back, my breath coming in short gasps. The room was suddenly colder, the air thick with an oppressive weight. Something was here with me. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The footsteps came again, this time unmistakably inside the saloon. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My flashlight flickered, the beam of light sputtering as if struggling against the darkness. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, bolting through the back door of the saloon and into the fog-shrouded streets. The footsteps followed, echoing through the empty town, growing louder and more insistent. I ran blindly, my camera clutched tightly in my hand, the fog swallowing up everything around me. I reached the church at the far end of town, its steeple barely visible through the mist. Without thinking, I threw open the doors and stumbled inside, slamming them shut behind me. The silence that followed was deafening, the pounding of my heart the only sound. I sank to the floor, trying to catch my breath. The church was cold, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. I looked around, the pews covered in a layer of dust, the altar draped in cobwebs. The stained glass windows were cracked and faded, the images of saints and angels distorted and twisted. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust on the floor, there were footprints in it. Fresh footprints, leading from the door to the altar. My footprints. But there were others too. Dozens of them, all leading in different directions, as if a crowd had been milling about the church. They crisscrossed each other, some old and faded, others fresh like mine. And they all led to the same place, the altar. I followed them with my eyes, my breath hitching in my throat. There, standing in front of the altar, was a figure. It was cloaked in shadow, its form indistinct, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I backed away, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of the fog. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, its presence filling the room with a suffocating dread. Then, without warning, it moved. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it was in no hurry at all. I stumbled back, my body trembling with fear. The figure reached the first row of pews, its footsteps echoing in the empty church. I turned and ran, bursting out of the church and into the foggy night. I could hear the footsteps behind me, relentless, growing louder with each passing second. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning with the effort. I had to get out of this town. I had to get to my car to safety. But the fog was disorienting, the streets twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. Every corner I turned led me deeper into the maze of buildings, further away from the edge of town. And all the while, the footsteps followed, unhurried but constant, like a predator toying with its prey. Finally, I saw it, the outline of my car through the fog. Relief surged through me, and I sprinted toward it, my fingers fumbling with the keys as I reached the door. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it with trembling hands. I started the engine, my heart pounding in my chest. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the road ahead. I didn't wait to see if the figure was still following. I floored the gas pedal, the tires spinning on the gravel as I tore down the road, away from Dry Creek. As I drove, the fog began to lift, the oppressive weight slowly easing from my chest. The trees on either side of the road thinned, and soon I was back on the highway, the familiar landmarks of civilization bringing a wave of relief. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the sun beginning to rise on the horizon. Only then did I pull over, my hands still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I looked at my camera, lying on the passenger seat, and for the first time since I'd left the town, I dared to breathe. I picked it up, scrolling through the photos I'd taken. The images were as haunting as I'd hoped, capturing the eerie beauty of the abandoned town. But as I flipped through them, my blood ran cold. In every photo, in the background, there was a figure, a dark, indistinct shape, always watching. Sometimes it was just a shadow in the window, other times a silhouette in the fog. But it was always there, following me. I threw the camera aside, my hands trembling. The legends were true. Dry Creek was haunted, and something from that ghost town had followed me. I never went back to Dry Creek. I never even spoke of it again. But sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls in and the world goes quiet, I hear them, the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer.